My name is Lauren Houston, and I am a first-year master's student. I am studying strategic communication.
So my name's Gar. I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, currently a grad student at UNC Chapel Hill, pursuing a master's in environmental engineering and city and regional planning.
So my name is Holly Dang, and I am a first-year graduate student in the School of Public Health, studying health policy and management.
I grew up in Fayetteville, North Carolina. My dad was in the Navy. My mom worked for Veterans Affairs. She's a nurse. I identify as an African Asian American. My mother is African American and my father is Okinawan American. Since my dad traveled a lot, I primarily grew up with my mother's side of the family, all of whom are African American. But my family itself is very interracial. I have plenty of cousins who are of multiple ethnicities, and so growing up multiracial never was a huge problem.
I identify as Chinese American. I guess like growing up, I didn't really think about race at all. For the majority of my schooling, it was like at almost 50% Asian or more than 50% Asian representation in like my classrooms and in my school. But then I went to Georgia for my undergrad, and for the first time I was really like, it was a huge cultural shift for me. I really had to think about race. I had to think about how I interacted with everyone else. And so you have people from all over, from all kinds of backgrounds. A lot of them are from Georgia, of course. Like a lot of my friends would talk about how they grew up in the South and how it's like very different, like being the only Asian kid in their entire high school. And that's actually how I come to grad school, because I got really interested in environmental justice. And like, you can always divide people up by their class and by their race. But when you look at all the indicators, race is the most significant influencer for like if you live next to a toxic waste dump or anything that is impacted environmentally.
I grew up in Syracuse, New York, which is in central New York. And then I went to undergrad at Cornell University, which is in Ithaca, New York. So I stayed in New York State for pretty much most of my life. I identify as an Asian American and specifically with Chinese heritage.
Since starting my career in higher education and student affairs, even though we hear the narrative that Asian American and Pacific Islanders are overrepresented in higher education, and there's a lot of news out today about how there's discrimination, how Asian American students may not be admitted into universities. There's a lot of myth out there, and of course the model minority myth. So I've always been told that Asian Americans are overrepresented in higher education. However, in my personal experience, having worked in higher education and student affairs for 25 years, in most spaces I am often the only either person of color or the only Asian American.
But when many people talk about the imposter syndrome, you know, kind of sitting in the classroom and being the only one, it just put a new heightened sense of awareness about who I was, what I looked like, what I seemed like, what others may think of me as, versus how I saw myself and how I would identify myself.
I realized that there weren't really any Asian American spaces on campus. Like we have all of the minority programs are for underrepresented minorities, so that doesn't include Asians. And specifically, there was a moment during my sophomore year where me and a couple of my friends went to OMED, the Office of Minority Education, for tutoring, just because it's like, well, they probably have more resources for us rather than going to the general tech one. The folks there were like, yeah, like, we're sorry that you're struggling, but also like our programs aren't for you. You should probably go to the Office of International Education. And we were like, but also all of us are from the States. Like the two friends who I went with are from Georgia, like from literally 20 minutes south of Atlanta. And we're just like, excuse you, like that was so rude. And we like left there not really knowing how to really internalize it, because we had never really thought about, oh, we need specific resources as Asian Americans.
So in my program, I'm actually one of 3 Asian Americans, I think. So it's me and two other females who are Indian American. I didn't realize that I would even think about like who was in my program based on like who is Asian American and who is not Asian American until I think, so there's this like Gillings Merit Scholarship, and I was looking through it and I'm like, oh, like everyone in my department who got this is Asian, but I'm the only Asian American because the other two individuals who got it were international students. I was like, oh wow, like I guess there aren't any really Asian Americans like represented in the program very well.
I guess because when you think about Asian America, you think about mainstream Asian America, which is being East Asian. So if you're Chinese or Japanese or Korean, that's usually what you see on TV. That's what Fresh Off the Boat is. That's what All American Girl was. And those are really the families that you see. Folks will identify, like they'll say that, oh, if you're Asian, then you probably speak Chinese. And like that completely erases every other identity. Like it just completely erases you as a person when that's the only way that mainstream America sees you. So the importance of data disaggregation is just making sure that you as an individual are seen by not just like by your community, but by the government, by how different programs affect you. Because as we know, like when you think about public policy, you can't apply a blanket policy and hope that it impacts everyone positively, because that's not going to happen. It has to be nuanced. It has to be culturally competent. I guess for me, representation is very important just because as a Chinese American, I recognize that I'm very privileged in the Asian American space because like I'm basically what you would see, right? Really kind of on our shoulders to make sure that there is a space for other folks to be able to speak their piece. I'm not trying to speak the piece for folks because that's not my experience and that's not what I'm here for. But if I can help elevate other people's voices, then that's really important because their needs are probably more important than mine because like I'm privileged.
Since we're talking within the context of higher education, Asian Americans are not a monolithic group, and we know that there are many different ethnicities, many different countries of origin, but also to understand that many Asian Americans have been born here in the US, and so even still having, being made to feel like you still don't belong.
In 4th grade, we actually went to China during, I guess, the beginning of fall, so I missed like the first 2 weeks of school. So then like when I came back, my friends are like, oh, we thought you got like deported to China or something. But I'm like, but I'm a US citizen, like that doesn't happen, right? So like I kind of joked around with it because I guess in 4th grade I was like, oh, like, haha, like I kind of felt like that too because I didn't come to school. But
even though you might have been born here, and I think a common question that Asian Americans receive is, where are you from? And that's often a loaded question for all of us.
And because I'm kind of ethnically ambiguous, the question of the day was always, so what are you? Where are you from? No, like, where are you really from? What I would love is for people to not be afraid to ask that question, but also be vigilant enough to know how to properly ask the question in a respectful way. And what is your ethnic background, or what is your racial identity, or what do you identify as? This semester, the Initiative for Minority Excellence decided to call together a group of Asian American graduate students to really just see what their needs are.
I think it is really important just because it's like, sometimes I think I'm going crazy in my programs. Like my cohorts are like fairly good, but sometimes they say really problematic things, or like they frame me like in a very specific way, and I'm like, okay, sure, like I like you, but also I don't have the energy to call you out on this right now. But just knowing that there are other grad students who are going through very similar things is very reassuring and reaffirming. I think also having another network outside of your cohort is like really important. When you talk about shared experiences and shared identity, and like find those kinds of commonalities that are greater than just your academic interests.
I think the experience of Asian Americans, Pacific Islanders, Desi Americans, the experience is very regional, and so how, particularly for students who are coming from out of state, how do you help students make sense of the fact that previously I may have been in a community that was largely Asian or Asian American, or I've been in a community where I am recognized as a person of color, but to come to the university and that may not be your own personal situation, that's where I think this graduate student group we're able to talk about those things. They're able to share their experiences with one another and find solidarity and empowerment with one another so that you can go onto campus and be a leader. It's really having a chance to just think about some things and to talk with someone else who might have experienced a similar situation, while at the same time recognizing it's a very diverse group and students are coming from a lot of different backgrounds and experiences.
I'm really excited that it's been started, and I hope it's able to grow and flourish, and we can really get the word out that, you know, we're here and we're here to stay.
I think it's really fostering good relationships across all races and ethnicities, and that's really, really important. Through love with one another overall in society, will we be able to come together through love and understanding. It's part of my mission to break down the stereotypes and the barriers of folks from all different backgrounds, that if we can come to an understanding that on a human level we're really very similar, we might have different beliefs, but how can we hold our different beliefs and still be able to move together in society?